heeft het goed gezien. Ik ben niet de burgemeester. Mijn naam is Hans-Pieter Slappenel en ik geef onder andere les op de Mandeville Academy. Welkom. Welkom in Gouda. Welkom Katrien Himmler. Welkom Arnold Grunberg. Welkom belangstellenden. Welkom bij deze Mandeville Academy Guest Lecture of dialoog. U bent hier zonder dat iemand u een strobreed in de weg heeft gelegd. De belemmeringen die u wellicht bent tegengekomen vanavond zijn van praktische aard. Is de oppas op tijd? Zit het verkeer mee? U mag hier gezien worden. Er staat morgen niet iemand aan uw bureau die meldt dat u gezien bent. Iedereen mag weten waar u bent geweest. Maar u hoeft het niet te delen. Het mag. Dat is vrijheid. Dat vinden wij normaal. Maar het is niet normaal. Zowel mevrouw Himmler als meneer Grunberg zijn door familiebanden verbonden met een tijd waarin vrijheid niet normaal was. Zij ondervinden dat nog iedere dag in vrijheid. Mandeville Academy staat voor het dialoog, voor het open gesprek, voor verbinding. Wellicht heeft u al gehoord over World in Conversation, een initiatief van Penn State University, waarin studenten uit verschillende landen, waaronder onze studenten, opgeleid worden om vooral te leren luisteren. Zonder oordeel, zonder een schuldvraag op te werpen. Met hun kennis kunnen ze bijdragen aan publieke diplomatie, om wonden te helen, om elkaar beter te begrijpen. Maar ook om, of misschien vooral, onszelf beter te begrijpen. Hoe was het mogelijk dat Duitsland Nazi-Duitsland werd? Een wereldoorlog ontketende en overging tot massamoord op Joden, Sinti, Roma. Duitsland was haar burgers. Hoe kon het dat deze burgers de massamoord mogelijk maakten? Zouden wij nee kunnen zeggen? Die Brüder Himmler, eine deutsche Familiengeschichte, het boek van mevrouw Himmler over haar opa Ernst en zijn broers Gebhard en Heinrich, begint met een citaat van de filosoof Tsvetan Todorov. If we had been in their shoes, we might have done the same. Als dat zo is, dan schuilt het gevaar van radicalisme, vreemdelingenhaat, totalitarisme, onverdraagzaamheid in ieder van ons. En is er dus des te meer reden om in het gesprek met de ander, maar vooral onszelf beter te leren kennen. Want vrijheid is niet vanzelfsprekend. Vrijheid moet bevochten worden. Op de grond, in het gesprek, elke dag weer. Wij vinden vrijheid normaal, maar het is niet normaal. Dezelfde menselijke eigenschappen die de Holocaust mogelijk maakten, zitten nog steeds in ons. De Hongaarse kampoverlevende en ontvanger van de 2022 Nobelprijs voor de literatuur, Imre Kertész, waarschuwde ons in het kader van het verschijnen van de film Schindler's List als volgt. I regard as kitsch any representation of the Holocaust that is incapable of understanding or unwilling to understand the organic connection between our own deformed mode of life, whether in the private sphere or on the level of civilization as such, and the very possibility of the Holocaust. Kertész koppelt onze gedeformeerde levenswijze, die mag u zelf invullen, aan de mogelijkheid van de Holocaust. Die is niet verdwenen door de Holocaust. Uw aanwezigheid bij deze dialoog is hartverwarmend. U bent bereid uit uw bubbel te komen en te luisteren. Blijf dat doen, ook als deze avond voorbij is. Zoek verbinding, luister. Wij zijn alleen samen vrij, niemand uitgesloten. Het gesprek tussen mevrouw Himmler en Arnold Grunberg zal in het Engels plaatsvinden. Daaraan voorafgaande zal mevrouw Himmler een voordracht geven. Na de dialoog is er ruimte om vragen te stellen. En meneer Grunberg heeft mij gegarandeerd dat dat in bijna elke wereldtaal kan. Ik wens jullie een fijne avond.
Good evening, everybody. I hope you can understand me. It's quite a bit difficult with the sound here, I think. Thank you very much for the introduction. And although, unfortunately, I didn't understand almost nothing because my Dutch is so bad. I can read it more or less, but I don't understand it when it's spoken. I would like to tell you something about my family tonight. We have, unfortunately, two screens who are quite small, so I don't know if in the back you can see anything or read anything. Otherwise, I will try to explain. It's only, the more important is what I'm telling you. I hope you understand that I will not speak freely because it's in English. It's not my mother language. I will read my lecture, and this will last for as maximum half an hour, a bit less, half an hour, and afterwards we will speak. We have time for questions. So these are the three main questions I want to talk about. First, and above all, it's about the question, why was the Nazi ideology so attractive for my grandparents and, of course, in general, for millions of other Germans too. In a second part, I will talk about how these Germans, and especially my grandparents, dealt with their responsibility after 1945, or better said, how they didn't deal with it, because most of them were never speaking about. And in a short third and last part, I'm asking about what were the consequences in the families and in the societies, or how does it affect all of us in Germany still until nowadays. I try to write down a simplified family tree of my family where you can see, I will just shortly explain. There were my two great-grandparents, Gebhard and Anna, who had three sons. The eldest Gebhard, Heinrich was the middle one, who was born in 1900, and the youngest one, Ernst, who was my grandfather, was born in 1905. So all of them had children. Heinrich and his wife Marga had one daughter, Gudrun, and I would tell you something about her still later because she had a very interesting life afterwards, or later on. Ernst and Paula, my grandparents, had four children. One of them was my father, who is still alive. He was born in 1939, so you find me on the right, in the corner, down there. Many years ago, when I started with the research about my own family, I didn't intend to write a book. I was sitting in the Federal Archives in Berlin, staring at the documents of my grandfather, Ernst Himmler, disturbed and shocked. And suddenly, I had a lot of questions, such as, what did Ernst know about the crimes against humanity that his brother Heinrich was responsible for? Why did Ernst enter the Nazi Party already in 1931? And what was so attractive about fascism or National Socialism for my grandfather and for millions of other Germans? How was it possible anyway that a well-educated boy from a normal family like Heinrich turned into a mass murderer and at the same time could be a loving husband and father? Here we see on the left official photo of Heinrich Himmler as Reichsführer SS, and on the right side we see a picture when he was visiting the camp of Auschwitz in 1942. The more documents I found in the archives, the clearer it became to me that Heinrich was not the so-called black sheep of an otherwise normal family, as I was always taught. My great-grandfather Gebhard came from a poor family, and he made a career as a teacher and headmaster in Munich because of hard work, scholarships, and a strong sense for networking. He even had close personal contacts to the Bavarian royal family, and he married my great-grandmother Anna, who was coming from a wealthy merchant's family. Gebhard and Anna were both patriotic and nationalistic, and they supported the First World War even financially. After the war, they lost every security in their life, which brought them in denial of the Weimar Republic from the very beginning. The elder sons, Gebhard and Heinrich, even were fighting against the new democracy in paramilitary organizations as students. A few years later, in 1923, the family lost again all their savings in the hyperinflation. In the same year, Heinrich entered the Nazi Party, and shortly after, he and his elder brother Gebhard took part in the beer hall putsch of Hitler. Here we see, it's not really sure if this picture of Heinrich Himmler is from 1927 as a young man on the left, but more or less. On the right, what you can't see again in the back, sorry, we see all the family. On the left, Gebhard with his wife, then Heinrich with his fiancée Marga, and in the back, my grandfather Ernst with the parents. It was only 1 or 2 months before Heinrich and Marga were marrying and afterwards lived in Munich. Already in 1927, their mother Anna went to a Hitler rally in Munich, and she was enthusiastic about the man. And her highly educated husband read Hitler's book Mein Kampf already in 1932, and he fancied it. Almost all my relatives, men and women, became members of the party, many of them even before the Nazis came to power in 1933. Not only Heinrich's brothers and the parents, but also several uncles, aunts, cousins, colleagues, and many friends. Many relatives, as my grandfather Ernst also, benefited from Heinrich's powerful position and from his readiness to always help the family. And most of the men were also members of the SS, which means that also their wives and their children belonged to the so-called SS-Sippengemeinschaft, the elitist SS community of kinsmen. There were many reasons for the attraction of the Nazi ideology. One was probably the world economic crisis of 1929, which hit Germany extremely hard with 6 million of unemployed, coming together with a political crisis with less and less trust in democracy. In the many elections in the years before 1933, Hitler was not only promising to solve all the complex problems of the country, but he also offered scapegoats, Jews, communists, and socialists, to be blamed for the misery. At the same time, he was offering the Germans an attractive utopia. He promised to make Germany great again, telling the Germans they deserve to play a dominant role in the world because they belong to the so-called master race. We should never underestimate probably how strong such an ideological promise can be, that some people should be worth more than others. Also, Germany didn't have a long democratic tradition like France, Great Britain, or the United States at that time. Instead, it had a long history of authoritarian, monarchistic regimes in a society where one of the most important issues of education was obedience. The Weimar Republic was fought from the beginning not only by strong right-wing groups, but also by many conservatives. Since the economic crisis of 1929, a lot of young academics were unemployed or had bad jobs, so that after 1933, many of them took their chance to make a career in the party administration or in the new upcoming SS institutions. One of them was my grandfather Ernst. As soon as the Nazis came to power, he applied to the national broadcast in Berlin, the Reichsrundfunk, where in summer 1933 he got employed as an engineer with the help of his brother Heinrich. This well-paid job allowed him to marry my grandmother Paula in the same summer and to buy a little house with garden with a loan from the Nazi party. Ernst and Paula were ambitious to make a career in the new regime, and they enjoyed a high standard of living with their 4 children. Their best friends and neighbors were also convinced Nazis, and all of the men made a career in the middle management of the party or of the SS. During the 12 years of the Nazi regime, my grandfather was providing the technical requirement for making it possible to spread the Nazi propaganda all over the country and all over the occupied European countries. As I found only few documents concerning Ernst, I found little evidence about his concrete responsibilities as well. But there was one letter from 1945 written to his brother Heinrich concerning a technical review about a man who was working in a Berlin enterprise. Ernst told Heinrich that this man might be dismissed because he was not as technically good as presumed. For any German man in that time, this would mean that my grandfather suggested to send him to the war front. But in this case, the man was to be sent to forced labor or to a concentration camp because he was a so-called half-Jew. For my family, the National Socialism was above all attractive for career opportunities, offering them again a higher social status and better living conditions. But all of them felt also attracted by the ideology. Like many other Germans, they enjoyed the feeling of being part of a huge and important movement which they could actively co-create. They appreciated the decline of unemployment and the first-time possibility of holidays for everybody, the so-called Kraft durch Freude movement. Especially for Gebhard and Ernst, the two technical brothers, the regime's openness for technical progress was very attractive. At the same time, all family members had a soft spot for the pompous rituals of the Nazis. They admired uniforms, military parades and mass events like the annual party rally in Nuremberg. Heinrich Himmler committed suicide shortly after the end of the World War II. Ernst died in the last days of the war in Berlin, possibly also by cyanide like his brother Heinrich. So from the three brothers, it was only Gebhard who survived the war. The parents had died already in 1936 and 1941. Gebhard was in an internment camp for 3 years as he was an officer of the Waffen-SS, and afterwards, like so many, he adapted to the new democracy on the outside while keeping his anti-democratic opinions only slightly modified. His 3 daughters were taught that it was better to hold back and not to engage in politics. They felt shame for the terrible crimes that their beloved Uncle Heinrich had committed, but they never asked their own parents about their attitude in the Third Reich. Others, like my father, asked about his father, but he never got answers by his mother. Heinrich Himmler's wife Marga and the daughter Gudrun both remained convinced Nazis until the end. Gudrun also married a man from the extreme right. And until her death in 2018, she engaged in several right-wing organizations, and her 2 children grew up in the paramilitary Wiking-Jugend, the Viking Youth, which was a following organization of the Hitler Youth. The Wiking-Jugend trained over many decades thousands of kids ideologically and militarily in order to prepare them for a violent system fall. My grandmother Paula seems to have gone in distance to the Nazi ideology, although it took her several years. She never was a party member, she only voted for the Nazis in 1933. But still, in the year 1951, she was writing letters of sympathy to a Nazi perpetrator who sat in prison being condemned to death. One of those letters I found in a folder in the house of my parents. But in her last years, she was finally able to feel pity for the victims of the Holocaust, and therefore she broke the contact to Marga and Gudrun because of their their political opinions. Nevertheless, she kept the letter that she wrote to that high-ranked Nazi in prison instead of throwing it away before her death. And she also kept this official photo of her brother-in-law Heinrich in her belongings. In many aspects, the dealing with the past in my family was very similar as in other German families after 1945. There is, on the one side, the official writing of history and the official consent of dealing with the German past that most Germans and almost all my family agrees with. Officially, during the last decades, German politics and society were dealing with our guilt in World War II and with the Holocaust. So the official consent, I just took 2 examples for it. There are many others, of course. We see the Holocaust Memorial site in Berlin. And on the right side, what you also have here in Netherlands, the Stolpersteine. There are many other examples. But on the other side, there has always been the private storytelling about not having any Nazis in their own family. During the last decades, in most German families, we didn't speak about guilt or responsibilities of our ancestors, but mainly about having lost everything during the war: relatives, homes, and property. Many Germans also felt betrayed after 1945 because by losing the war, Hitler didn't keep his promises. And many felt devastated when facing the fact of millions of deaths, 12 million German refugees from the lost territories, and a completely destroyed country. Of course, these experiences of suffering of the war are real as well. Many Germans, especially children, have been traumatized by the war and in most cases were left alone with the trauma. So it is good and important that there are all these books published in the recent years. There are many more. These are just a few examples from children of the war, great children of the war, and they're all bestsellers. Sold millions of these books. It's good and important that we finally talk about this part of the history as well. But unfortunately, these bestsellers have a tendency of avoiding the historical context. They hardly talk about the fact that the Germans only suffered of the war because they voted for the Nazis in the first way. And they mostly don't talk about the fact that most Germans were enthusiastic about conquering the neighboring countries without any pity for millions of Europeans suffering under the German occupation. So reality is usually much more complex. And in most German families, we have a mix of perpetrators, bystanders, and victims of the war, sometimes even in the same person. Today, an overwhelming majority of Germans are convinced Democrats, and a huge majority is accepting our responsibility for the past and for the terrible Nazi crimes. A study of a German university came recently to the result that an overwhelming majority of Germans finds it very important, or at least important, to continue teaching our children about the Holocaust and to show them Auschwitz. But at the same time, 70% of the same people believe that there are no perpetrators in their own families. So the Nazis were always the others. There was even a famous book title called Grandpa Was No Nazi. The personal approach to my family history with the publication of my book was quite a challenge for me. It took me many years with several phases of stagnation, of doubts and anger also about the fact that I had to do it all alone. But once it was done, it offered me a huge chance to go into the discussion with the audience, as I experienced during the last years in Germany and other countries with descendants of perpetrators and bystanders, but also with survivors and their children, and with young and old people. My book sometimes seems to work as a kind of door opener for people from all sides, who grew up in families that were not talking about the past. In my lectures, people feel encouraged to speak about their own family, often for the very first time. So doing research, writing, and talking about one's own family history somehow offers or may offer a chance to connect the two different storytellings we have in Germany. The official history on the one side about the German guilt, and the familiar storytelling on the other side about no one being a Nazi. It also may offer perhaps a chance to deal with the challenges of remembering nowadays, to think about how a fourth generation that is much more ethnically diverse can understand what happened in that faraway time and how it still concerns us nowadays. History doesn't simply repeat, but it may help us to understand similarities and differences of nowadays. For example, the mechanisms of exclusion, of devaluation, or of persecution of minorities in modern societies. But it offers also the chances that democracy offers us to deal with such problems, or how we may be able to deal with them. Thank you very much for listening.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Catherine, for your beautiful speech. I think it was a wonderful summarization, especially the first half of what you said of your book. Just so you know what you can expect in the next hour or so, I'm going to talk to Catherine. We decided to say Catherine and Einon. That's much easier. We talked a bit before. And then after half an hour or so, you can ask questions to Catherine. And I have to say right now that I'm quite strict. A question is a question. It doesn't last longer than 30 or 40 seconds, and it ends with a question mark. If you feel the need to disclose some personal anecdotes, opinions, or information about yourself or your family members, you can do this, but afterwards.
Can I add just a few short sentence? You may also ask questions to Arnon, of course, no? I guess.
Of course you can.
Okay.
Of course, I would say, in my understanding, the evening is about you, Catherine. But if somebody feels the urgent need to ask me a question, I will be polite enough to answer the question. Catherine, I'd like to take the 30 minutes I have to talk a bit more about your book, Die Brüder Himmler. Of course, you wrote also another book containing letters of Heinrich Himmler. Maybe that's for next occasion. I hope so. I'd like to start with a wonderful sentence. At least I found the sentence wonderful. You mentioned a book by Alfred Anders, an important German author. And he wrote a memoir. Can we call it a memoir? Or, yeah, a memoir called Der Vater eines Mörders, the father of a murderer. And that's about your great-grandfather, who was a principal of a high school in Bavaria, a gymnasium. And then in the epilogue of this book, there's this sentence. I'm going to look. Where's the quote? I will first say it in German. Schützt Humanismus denn vor gar nichts? In English, does humanism protect against anything? And of course, I think it's a very valid question. Your family, they belong to the middle class, to what's called in German Bildungsbürgertum, meaning people of the middle class believing in education, believing in the ideals of education, believing in humanism. So this question is very important. What would you say to Mr. Anders now in 2023? Does it protect us?
Well, it's difficult to answer that in a short way, because when the book of Anders came out in 1980, I think, or 81, something like that, there was a huge debate, especially in Munich, about this book. A really strong, controversial debate, because there were lots of former pupils, former students who had my great-grandfather as a teacher and were defending him very strictly against Anders and were blaming the writer, the author Anders, that he always was a failing student, he was very bad, he had to leave school later on, very shortly after that. But in all this debate, there was not really anyone thinking about what Anders was trying to show, where this might come from, or what impact education or the parents' house, the surrounding might have had on the development of Heinrich as a mass murderer. No one really was interested in this question in the debate. Interesting enough that it didn't happen.
Was it too painful, that part of the...
Maybe it was too painful, maybe it was too early, because it was the early 80s when we didn't really have an open debate in Germany about how widespread the responsibility in our society was in reality, about who was responsible and how many Germans were responsible for the crimes that we committed in that time.
Yeah. There's also, I think, to understand maybe your family a bit better, and before this conversation, I just told you in private already that part of your descriptions of your family, of the family Himmler in Munich, reminded me a lot of this wonderful Michael Haneke movie, The White Ribbon, Das Weiße Band. Das Weiße Band. At a certain point, I believe in 1910, Gebhard decides to go to Greece, your great-grandfather, and he believes he might not come back. At that time, it was still quite a journey, and he wrote letters to his 3 sons. And then there's this letter, I believe that's to your grandfather, and I will quote again, first in German. Du musst recht schön folgen und musst Mutti und die Brüderle immer recht lieb haben und alles tun, was der Herr Lehrer oder der Herr Professor sagt, dass sie dich alle recht lieb haben und du so gute Note heimbringst wie dein Bruder Beda, Gebhard. Und dann kannst du später ein tüchtiger Onkel Doktor werden oder Schiffe, Maschinen, Häuser bauen oder sonst etwas Schönes. Nur Professor wie dein Vater sollst du lieber nicht werden. Also auf Englisch, you have to follow along and always really love mom and the little brothers and do everything the teacher or professor says. That they all really love you and that you get good grades like your brother Breda, Gebhard, and then you can later become a capable uncle, doctor, or build ships, machines, houses, or anything else beautiful. You shouldn't just become a professor like your father. To me, I mean, I know this was another time, but there's such a detachment. If this is your last letter to your own child, I cannot say that I was shocked, but I thought maybe there, and also you spoke already in your talk about obedience. And here again, it's a bit of a cliche, but might this be one of the many explanations for why this perfectly normal middle-class family became so much involved in mass murder, in one of the greatest crimes of humanity?
Yeah, it's of course the question I was asking myself as well. That's why I was getting deeper and deeper, or getting more and more back in the family history in order to understand where it came from. How was the parents' house? How was the education, the house of the Himmlers? But in the end, I had the impression that I didn't really understand it better, apart from questions of obedience and of a father who was trying to be in control of everything even after his death. He tries to determine the life of his children, which is completely absurd, of course. But apart from that, I came to the question that I still didn't understand why, if all the 3 brothers had the same education, the same parents' house, why only Heinrich became a mass murderer and his brothers didn't. They made a career in the National Socialism, but they were not killing people like Heinrich did, and not, it was not really comparable.
Can I offer, maybe based on your book again, a solution? Also, by the way, I found that in this family, to me at least, there was an absolute lack of a sense of humor. There was no
I'm
irony.
afraid that's true.
There was absolutely no humor. I mean,
I'm afraid that's true, and that might be a much more interesting base for Nazi ideology, because we know nowadays that the Nazis in general had absolutely no sense of humor. This was a very fundamental part of their ideology, of their looking at the world. They didn't understand jokes. They got angry. They really got angry if someone was laughing about them. This was the worst that could happen to them. They feel attacked by jokes.
Yeah, there's no irony whatsoever. And also, I think maybe Heinrich, I mean, you yourself asked the question, maybe Heinrich was really an idealist compared to 2 of his brothers. There is this. I'd like to go back a bit, and this is something personal you wrote at the beginning of the book, where you wrote something about yourself, and this intrigued me a lot. Many things did, but especially also this. You wrote there, again first in German, inzwischen war ich Mutter eines Sohnes geworden, der nicht nur die schwere Erblast meiner Familien übernehmen würde. Sein Vater gehört einer jüdischen Familie an, die von den SS-Leuten meines Großonkels Heinrich verfolgt worden war und deren Angehörige bis heute vor dem tiefsitzenden Trauma der Ermordung vieler Familienangehörige heimgesucht werden. In English, in the meantime, I had become the mother of a son who would not only take on the heavy inheritance of my family, his father belongs to a Jewish family that was persecuted by the SS men of my great-uncle Heinrich. These people are still haunted by the deep-seated trauma of the murder of many family members. I asked myself the question, would I be able to engage in such a relationship? Yes, I said to myself, of course I would. Love is, but then to have a son, to have a child together, wouldn't be this too much for the son? And then, well, of course I asked the question already to you, but I would like to repeat it in public. How important was it that you have a child with a Jewish man whose family was killed by
Important for what? What do you mean
for
exactly?
you? I mean, how important was the act of, maybe the act of falling in love? Because also in the beginning of the book, there's this first that you said, one, I identified with the Verfolgten, with the persecuted.
As a child.
As a child.
And as a youngster, yeah.
As a youngster.
As a teenager.
So by the time you fell in love with this man, this Israeli Jew,
it was completely different.
It was okay. Maybe
I didn't identify anymore with the victims.
Maybe let's go back, because why did you identify as a child with the victims?
I guess it was the easier way. It was my way of how I tried to deal with all the horrible stories I found out. Maybe I must go back a bit more. My father was always openly speaking about our relationship to Heinrich Himmler and about the crimes he was committing, what he was responsible for. So we always knew, my sister and me, we always knew. We can't even say there was a special day where we sat at the table and then he told us. No, it just happened always. It was always open and clear. But there was a certain moment when I was 11 years old when I saw the movie, the US movie Holocaust. And this had a very strong impact on me because this was the moment when I understood for the first time what it really meant, what Heinrich was really responsible for, my great uncle. And from that moment on, I couldn't stop reading anymore. I started to read all the stuff I could get, all children's book about the Nazi time. Now I'm lost a bit. The question.
The question was, why did you identify as a child with the
yeah, why
with the
did I
victims?
identify? I think it was because I was having a lot of empathy. I felt very deeply and very strongly with what happened to the victims, and I was crying a lot in that time. And it was I just had to find out how to deal with it and how I should feel. And that time I felt, on the one hand, I identified with the victims. I read Anne Frank, the diary, again and again and again. But on the other side, I felt guilty myself. And it took me years to understand that it's not on me to feel guilty for what my ancestors have done. The guilt should belong to them. And it took me many years to get more distance and to get it clearer that I have to deal with responsibility in what way ever.
And when you had this relationship with this man, did you ever discuss with him how it could be for a child to be the child of those two parents? There's this Dutch author who passed away, Harry Mulisch, who famously said, I am World War II because his mother was Jewish, his father was a collaborator. And after reading this about your son, I thought suddenly, he is more entitled to say, I am World War II than Harry Mulisch, in a way. So,
yeah, if you want to say it like that, maybe. Yes, of course we thought about, but not really deeply, because we always had the impression that it doesn't really matter for our relationship that we are coming from such contradictory families, because at the beginning we saw much more the similarities. It seems a bit absurd if I tell it like that, but we saw more the similarities of our familiar background in that way, that we both were coming from very liberal, from very open-minded families, and both sides of our families didn't have any problem with us coming together. They were very open and friendly, welcoming me as well as vice versa. And we are separated since many years. We are divorced already since many years, but still we are in good contact, and our parents are still visiting each other. So the contact remained. I think we realized only much later, and only in special situations, that we were coming from the two very different sides. It happened always when we were quarreling about anything. Couples are quarreling, couples are having trouble with each other, that's very normal. But nevertheless, it didn't matter what we were discussing about. Suddenly we were falling into our roles back, we were thrown back, and we were really surprised about what happened. We were just standing beside and watching ourselves in the situation, what was going on. We were just reacting in a way we didn't expect we would. And he was telling me a Nazi, or telling other people they were Nazis. All around him were Nazis suddenly in such situations. And I was saying bullshit as well, vice versa. So it really became very strange. But this was nothing that we really were aware of from the beginning.
And nothing that could not be overcome, because also you said about 1 hour ago that your son, who grew up in Germany, really identifies as a German, and also seems to be the first generation in both families, who is free of the burden of World War II.
Yes, I didn't exactly say that he feels only as a German, but more German than Israeli. Yeah. He feels like a mixture of both sides, and he was very interested in the history of the Jewish side of the family, and has a lot of very, very strong contacts to all the family members nowadays. But yes, I think you could say, if I'm watching how he's dealing with it, with this difficult situation of being half and half, I would say that he's doing it quite well, because he's, on the one side, I think he's a very strong character and a very open-minded young man who is able to really to build bridges. He's very good in communicating with both sides and building bridges between the sides. And on the other side, I have the impression that it helped him that I was writing down the story, and I was doing it in this public way in order to enable him, or bringing him in the position that I never had and my father never had, that we always were imagining horrible scenarios, what might have happened, and how much Ernst, my grandfather, might have been involved. It was much worse what we imagined than what came out by the research.
Worse, yeah.
Yeah, the imagination
because,
was, the fantasy was much worse.
Of course, because the fantasy was worse. Yeah, that's often the case, isn't it? Yeah. But of course, your family not all family members were pleased, because it was too convenient that only the black sheep was Heinrich, as you said before.
No, that was not what's coming out from my research. No. Before, they thought that Heinrich was only the black sheep, apart from my father, who was always suspicious that there might have been more about his father, but he couldn't find out anything.
And that's also why I urged you read this in the beginning of the book, to do research. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is this, I saw it this morning, this documentary made by an Israeli movie maker, also about you. It's called Hitler's Children, and it's about the children or family members of or high and high up Nazis who were high up, like this family member of Göring. You are in it, of Höss, of course Nicholas Frank, who wrote a few books about his father, Hans Frank, who was the general governor of occupied Poland. And I found the movie, to be honest, extremely moving. There's this scene that the grandson of Höss, the commander of Auschwitz, goes to Auschwitz, and that was almost too much for me, to be honest. That is, you see, I've never seen so many people who are completely kaput in a movie that lasts 1 hour and 20 minutes. I think you are the most sane person. The least kaput. The least kaput. I would say, I would not think when I saw you, I thought, no, Catherine is not kaput. No. She isn't. But still, I mean, this is, how was it for you to, I mean, and you are in contact with Nicholas, you told me, you know some of these people. I mean, how, you said before you identified as a child with the victims. Are you identifying also with these men and women?
I wouldn't.
Are you identifying? Yeah, with Nicholas, with all those people.
No, I wouldn't say I'm identifying with him. I don't know the others who took part in the movie. I just know Niklas Frank, and whom I know also was the journalist Eldad Beck, who went with the grandson of Höss together to Auschwitz. This was also a very weird part of the story because he's the son of survivors, and they went there together, and it was all the time talking about the grandfather, the perpetrator, but never ever this grandson asked a question about Eldad Beck's family. This was so weird to me. It seemed very, he was very narrow-minded in this way, but this may have different reasons. What I wanted to say is, in answering your question, is that I met several of these other descendants of perpetrators, of course. After my book came out, there were different possibilities. There were also several others who published books about their families. But I think for all of us, it was important at a certain moment, or during research or after publishing, to meet those other descendants of perpetrator families, because we all made the same experience. In all these families, you have usually just one who is digging up the past, who is doing the dirty job. You may be lucky sometimes that you have some few around you, some relatives who are supporting it, at least passively, in a passive way. Then you have a huge majority of indifferent relatives who never express their opinion. Even afterwards, I never got any resonance where they were saying whether they read my book or not, if they found it bullshit or they appreciated it. Nothing, just no reaction. And this happens in all these families. And then you also, in all these families, always have a small minority who is completely against, who is fighting against you, who sees us as Nestbeschmutzer. I don't know how you say that in English.
The people who don't, the family secrets are open there for everybody to see.
Washing the dirty laundry.
You're not,
public,
you're washing,
something like
you
that.
show the dirty laundry to the people. That's basically
exactly. So for all of us, it was important to exchange with the other descendants who did this dirty job, because we have no one else in the family usually to talk about.
Is this how you feel about this book and the work you did? It's a dirty job that somebody needed to do in your family?
It was, at the beginning, it was more like a dirty job, but then it became more and more something like, I was more and more glad about having done it, because it has a sort of healing function as well for me personally, I would say.
You write also at the end of the book about how Gebhard, the only surviving brother, even after the war, defended Heinrich. I will again read the quote. Schon 1965 hat er Aufzeichnungen über seinen Bruder verfasst, in denen er ihn ähnlich verharmloste und ihm Schutz nahm, wie bei seiner Aussage in Nürnberg 10 Jahre zuvor. Es sei Heinrichs größtes Leid gewesen, schrieb er hier, dass er stets auf der negativen Seite der Menschheit. Das entspricht auch der Darstellung von SD-Auslandschef Walter Schellenberg und von Heinrichs Heilpraktiker Felix Kersten, die beide enger Vertraute Himmlers in ihren Memoiren fast identische Äußerungen des Reichsführers SS wiedergeben. Der größte Massenmörder aller Zeiten litt also darunter, dass er die Drecksarbeit verrichten musste und sehnte sich in Wahrheit danach, wie andere den Aufbau der idealen neuen Gesellschaft voranzutreiben. Fragezeichen. In English, as early as 1956, he had written notes, Gebhard, about his brother, in which he played down the guilt and protected him in a similar way to his testimony in Nuremberg 10 years earlier. It was Heinrich's greatest sorrow, he wrote here, that he always had to work on the negative side of humanity. This also corresponds to the portrayal of SD4 and Secret Service Chief Walter Schellenberg and Heinrich's masseur Felix Kersten, who both, close confidants of Himmler, reproduce almost identical statements by the Reichsführer SS in their memoirs. So, and this is the quote, that's what I'm asking a question you about. So the greatest mass murderer of all time suffered from having to do the dirty work and in truth yearned like others to build the ideal, new to come society.
I think I have to read my book again. I don't even remember this, what you're quoting. But I wrote it.
Yeah, you wrote it. Wow, yeah.
Completely forgotten.
This is more than being. I mean, this is complete whitewashing.
Yeah, sure it is. Of course, that was Gebhard was really doing after the war during decades. I think this was one of his main jobs. He was trying to whitewash his brother Heinrich and blame just Hitler for everything that has happened. Yeah. Which, of course, was something that many, many Germans did after the war. No? He was not alone with that, but he had a special intention because it was his beloved brother, of course.
In German, I think it became popular, it became in fashion in the 70s. There's this expression, die Unfähigkeit zu trauern, the impossibility to feel sorrow for what happened. And in a way, there's also this example of your grandmother Paula, who after the war, and also she might have had good reasons, feels sorrow for herself and for her family, even to this extent that she wrote, I think it was in a letter or maybe in a diary, that she was hoping for the atom bomb to kill all of Germany, or all of Europe, because she herself was in such a bad shape. And you told me that
the suffering would end finally.
That the suffering would end finally. And you told me that your father, who always felt that his father, your grandfather, was the bad guy, really disliked what you wrote about your grandmother, about his mother.
Yeah, well, I think that's something that happens to many of the children of such families, such Nazi families, that they somehow have to decide how to deal with it. Many of them have decided to stay completely loyal to both of their parents. Others, especially from the 68 movement, from the 60s students movement, decided to have a radical break and to break the contact to their parents because they just said they were Nazis, I don't want to have to do any more with them, anything. And others decided in a way comparable to the way that my father chose, that they try to separate between the two parents, that one is the good guy, the other one is the bad guy, which mostly affects the fathers as the more responsibles in that time, who were the bad guys, and then at least the mother must have been a good person. So I think that's might be the background of it.
I think that Nicholas Frank is an exception. Not only, as you said, he kills his father every day again, but he has also nothing good to say about his mother. And by the way, his books are worth reading. I'm not sure what time it is. I'm looking. I don't want... Okay, still some time. Before I open the discussion to the public, I'd like to end my questions with something also that's in the end of your book. It's about these conversations that children and grandchildren of victims are having with children and grandchildren of perpetrators. And there you make an observation again that I found quite interesting. Again, the quote in German. Später bei einem Gesprächskreis für Täter und Opfernachfahren registrierte ich befremdet, dass die Kinder von Verfolger und Opfern für die Kinder der Täter eine Entlastungsfunktion spielen sollten. Sie sollten die Tröstende sein, bei die sich die Täterkinder mal so richtig ausweinen konnte, anschließend Absolution erteilen. Diese Beobachtung schreckte mich. Later, during a group discussion for the descendants of the perpetrators and the victims, I registered with some dismay that the children of the perpetrators and the victims were supposed to play a comforting role for the children of the perpetrators. They were supposed to be the consoling ones, where the children of the perpetrators could really cry and then be given absolution. This observation haunted me. What was so haunting? What was so schrecklich about this observation?
Oh, it's so long time ago that it happened. I'm quite sure I wouldn't write about it in that way anymore as I did it in that time. I was really shocked about this one time I went there, and then much later, several years later, in one of my lectures, there came someone who was from that organization, a very young man, and he told me that this was not what usually was happening in this group, and I felt so bad about having blamed them. I mean, I don't name them, it's anonymous. But he understood immediately that it was his group I was writing about. What I disliked was something that I met several times with German descendants. I think that they have a tendency to expect this absolution, or that, how would you say, I don't know the English word now.
Forgiveness?
Forgiveness, exactly. They are asking for Verzeihung, for forgiveness, the side of the victims or the survivors. And I think it's something that we can't expect. If it happens, they can be happy, if so, but it's nothing we can expect. And if it happens, it's a long process usually, and nothing that happens in one evening, in one session where you meet for an hour and then you go away and everything, problem solved. I think it doesn't work like that.
And also, of course, it's very complicated because, as you said in the beginning already, that you cannot be responsible for acts of your family members. No?
I can't be personally responsible for the acts of my family members. I said it with the word of guilt. That I went in distance to the image of feeling guilty that I had as a child. But responsibility is a word you can understand in a wider sense as well. I can not only feel responsible for my personal family that I didn't choose, of course, I can also feel responsible as a German woman being raised in this country with this special history, and I have to deal somehow in the way, especially when I'm going abroad and someone is asking me about or talking to me, asking questions about my German background. I just need to have an opinion about and think about how where's my standing towards this history. And of course, in a wider, broader sense, I can just feel responsible as a human being for whatever I choose to feel responsible and take action for.
Absolutely. Would you say that forgiveness is possible? Is it important?
I think it might be possible, but I'm not so sure if it's really important.
Why not?
I don't know. Do you think it's important or possible?
Healing might be possible. I think the better word is healing.
I think so too.
The better word is healing, and it's not for me to forgive. It's not, I would say, again, that's for the generation before me to give.
Exactly.
I'm out of this game.
Exactly.
But it's a question if it's possible to be a Jew in Germany again, and what it means to be a Jew in Germany.
Yeah.
And as you said before, and then I will open the discussion to you. You are an optimist, but you were pessimistic about some things, like the new elections coming in the eastern part of Germany, where the AfD might become number one, the biggest party. And of course, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, is not the same as a neo-Nazi party, but still. So you're not too confident that we are moving, that Germany, and I said, to me, Germany is still an enlightening example compared to other European states. You answered, for how long? I'm not sure for how long this will last.
Well, I mean, I'm always switching between optimism and pessimism every day, several times. So I'm not really clear about what position I have in this question. I think we have both. It's always very ambiguous. We have on the one side, we have these very strong right-wing movements or right-wing parties all over Europe, and we see what happens in the countries already that have a government which is right populistic in that way governed. But on the other hand, what I also told you when we were speaking before about I'm optimistic in the way that I think that we have strong democracies in several countries that have enabled us to develop so many wonderful opportunities, so many capacities and competences. So I think we should be able, we have all the measures and all the tools and all the capacities to deal with the heavy problems we are facing and to find good solutions for them. That's what I'm thinking in the positive moments and the optimistic moments.
On this evening at about 8:40. If you have a question to Katrin, raise your hand. Somebody's going to come with you with a mic, so wait for the mic. And I see there's a hand over there, this gentleman. Maybe you can also say your name, that's as a matter of politeness.
Good evening, my name is Ed Hoeks. Thank you very much, both of you, for extremely interesting introductions. My question is the following. After a successful Vergangenheitsbewältigung in Germany, at least I think it was successful or is successful, maybe you think otherwise. What we see now in Germany is more and more an increase of attention for the German suffering during the Second World War, in literature and in films and in other expressions of art and culture. How would you see this balance developing between, on the one hand, this increase of attention for the German suffering, German civilians, many millions killed, and on the one hand, and the other hand, the idea of guilt, the collective guilt, if it exists, and how this might bring this idea or awareness of guilt to the background of the German feeling and consciousness.
Well, as I was talking about in my introduction before about this phenomena in Germany with all the upcoming movement, all the upcoming films and books dealing with the German suffering, I go along with you. I think that's very much overdone at the moment, but this might be a natural reaction to the years before that no one really dared to speak about this part of experiences. And we have to make conscious, we have to be aware that this storytelling really was always present in the German families, in the private family storytelling. It was always the dominant telling, but it never was coming out publicly. No one dared to speak in public about that side because it was not opportune. The opportunistic, it was, the common sense was to speak about the guilt. So I'm quite optimistic that this will go down in the following years again. There is a hype now concerning this German suffering, but I'm quite optimistic it will go down and it will modify again when everyone has published the necessary books and stories. I hope so.
There's one small thing I'd like to add is now, I think it's in the Dutch theaters, a documentary by a Ukrainian movie maker who also made a very good documentary about Babi Yar that's based on a book by Sebald that's about the bombing of German cities. And yeah, I think it's worth checking out these two documentaries. I cannot remember the name of the movie maker, but Dovnice, thank you. The next question. Yeah.
For Katrien.
Okay, also, can you say your name?
My name is Marco Lindaert. If I was hearing correctly, your father was practically differing from the rest of Germany, and the fact that he was so open about the past of your family. Can you maybe tell why that was, and in what way did he influence you or play a role in the fact that you started digging in your family history?
Well, I think it had to do quite a lot with the fact that he lost his father when he was very young, that he was only 6 years old when his father died. So he once said that it was really his chance to become the man that he is nowadays, that he could develop such freely, in this free way, study what he wanted, without having this father in the background who was educating him after 45. We know from many German families, from former Nazi families, that the Nazi education went on, continued after 45 in the families, in private. There were quite a lot of publications of children of these Nazi families who published in the 60s, 70s, or later on, telling us about how horrible it was, the experience to grow up with these Nazi fathers, or Nazi mothers as well, after the war still. So my father, like several others, I know it also from the daughter of Albert Speer. She also said it once to me, that she was probably quite lucky that she wasn't growing up after 45 with this father, because it made it possible for her to become a free spirit, a free mind, in a way that wouldn't have been possible with that father. And I would like to add that, as you also asked about the impact this might have had on me, I think it was very important, the education that my parents gave me from the very beginning, because without this sort of education, I wouldn't have gone this way, I'm quite sure. This was a very important fundament, that they raised us to be courageous, to speak up for people who are weaker than us, who don't have such a lobby, that we interfered when we saw discrimination anyhow. I did it at least. I'm not so sure about my sister, she was more shy, but I always did it. I engaged always in public, because I always knew I had my parents in the back. They were always supporting me. And this, I think, was very important as a fundament for me to have the courage later on to do the research about the family. Otherwise, maybe I would never have done it.
Good evening, and thanks for a very enlightful discussion. My name is Robert. I just have a question. And it's a question to the two of you. You spend a lot of time analyzing what led up to the rise of Hitler and everything that happened. We now have had 70 years of quite some prosperity with ups and downs, but it's been very different times. And we still see the development of radicalism, left and right, and denials of Holocaust and that sort of thing. What do you think is leading to that in the current society?
Well, it's a huge question, difficult to answer it in a short way. There, of course, usually these phenomena have very complex reasons, not only the one reason why it happens. And I'm quite sure that in every European country it has a special reason why they're rising in this certain way and why they're focusing on special aspects or seeming to be that attractive in a certain epoch of time in this special country. But in general, there have always been certain attractions of these radical movements, of course. They know very well, the right-wing extremists know very well what is appealing for people, and they are referring usually, on the one hand, they're referring to the fear that they realize in the society, what people are anxious about, if they are feel uncertain about how the future will be, how problems will be solved that we all are facing right now. And they're dealing with these feelings, with these emotions in the society, and transforming them with their paroles, with their prejudices, and making them stronger, bringing them back into the middle of the society. And they are very, very good in connecting or in spreading their ideas to the middle of our societies and making them, how you say, salonfähig, you say in German? Yeah, salonfähig. Okay, it's understandable. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Katrine. Since the question was also to the two of us, a small addition, a short addition, I think also there's this tendency to always blame just the economy and to blame economical reasons for. I think that's too easy, and that's not sufficient for the explanation to explain the rise of the NSDAP, and also not today. I would say that there will be, and there has always been, a need for scapegoats. And I'm afraid this will never disappear. And also the whole concept of liberal democracy, as it was back then in Weimar, of course, democracy is something that has many deficiencies and many sides that are not very glorious. And democracy moves very, very slow and can become like a big theater or like a debating club. So when there is a sense of urgency, I think there is this fatal attraction, and I think attraction is an important word here, to look for a solution and to look for a strong leader who will silence others and who will make the decisions that seem to be needed.
Just 1 second. I would only like to add that you're absolutely right what you're saying, and maybe in addition to that, they have a tendency always, and that is what makes them so attractive, the right-wing extremists, they have a tendency to simplify the problems always, and to offer, or they seem to offer, simple solutions for complex problems, which doesn't work in reality, but it seems very attractive to people in a world that gets more and more complex, more and more complicated, and everybody loves simple explanations and simple solutions. If someone suggests you and says, they are the bad guys, they're the scapegoats, and we are the good guys, black and white. Yeah.
2 questions there. Maybe the lady first.
On the other side also, since a long time already.
Yeah, I did it excellently. Maybe first to the young man there. If you can stand up.
Als je je vraag stelt, zou je dan even willen gaan staan? Want dan kan iedereen je zien.
Hello, I am Niels, and I'm currently in secondary school, where when it goes about political ideologies, we are only taught in depth about the most extreme parts of the spectrum and not in the more center, the ideologies that are more in the center. Do you think that also contributes to the increase in extreme ideologies?
Absolutely. I think this is a big part of the problem, that the media and politicians from the democratic parties are too often willing to jump on the train of the paroles from the right wing and blow them out and repeat them again and again in talk shows to discuss the problems that are not really the main issues we have to deal with, but always to focus again on the refugee problem since years, and do it again and again and again, instead of talking about many, many other issues we have to deal with. This is a big part of the problem. Another part of the problem is in Germany, which is even worse, I think, that for many years, politicians were not only refusing to show any sort of pity or empathy towards the victims of attacks, from terror attacks or from right-wing neo-Nazi attacks, but instead they blamed the victims. They blamed them to be responsible for these attacks in the end, because there were just too many. We can't really deal in our society if there are too many people who are seen or read as strangers. So how else should the poor white people defend against this overwhelming majority? So this was a turning around the victim perpetrator sides, and which was told by many leading politicians in Germany over many years. So I think it's no wonder that there's so many people who are reacting to that or feel supported and say, okay, so if they say it and if the media write it, it should be okay. I shouldn't be blamed for attacking them.
Absolutely. If I can add one short thing also, I think there's the need for a politician to get attention. And the moment you engage in transgression, the moment you make a statement that's absolutely absurd or ridiculous, but it's hurting some parts of the population, you will get attention. It will be headlines. Like a couple of years ago, a certain politician suggested that the Quran here in the Netherlands should be burned. And of course, at that time, it was highly efficient because he got a lot of attention, and some people liked it. Yes. So it's like this big competition. Who is going to get the headlines? Who is going to get? If you want to be known, it's not very wise to be reasonable. Unfortunately. Yes, the gentleman over there.
Hi, my name is Bart Klauwens. I have a question going back to the past. So if you leave history as it is, but just isolate your family, do you see any possibility of them behaving differently? So so in the same background, but just your family, and maybe something triggered them not to behave like this, or do you think it's just within as it is and tough luck?
That's an interesting question. And I'm quite sure I can't answer it. Very difficult. Yeah, of course, it depends on so many factors, on so many issues that were the surrounding, the political situation, the society, the manner of education in that time, the political development. It depended on so many factors. Of course, also on the personal character of each of the persons who were involved in my family. And yeah, I mean, there were several historians who were speculating about what might have become of Heinrich Himmler if the circumstances would have been different in the time he was in the right position to get all these functions he was taking over. Maybe he would just have become a very average bookkeeper or whatever. Or in my family, they always said it's really a pity that he didn't manage to get a good job in farming, what he really was studying. He was studying agriculture and left it shortly afterwards because he decided for engaging in politics in very early years. But if he would have found a good possibility to work on any farm, on a, how you would say, on a Gutshof, something better, a bit better, bigger, then yeah, he might have not become the man he was.
So you think like personal ambition is might have been a big driver in his life?
I didn't understand that. Sorry.
So you think that his personal ambition, just for his personal career, was a big driver in his decisions towards becoming a mass murderer?
Correctly, but it's very hard. But my understanding is that you asked if you thought that Heinrich Himmler, his ambitions, his opportunism, led him to become a war criminal. War es Opportunismus? Hat es nur mit seiner Ambitionen zu tun, dass er ein Massenmörder geworden ist?
Well, certainly not only, but it was part of it, I guess. I would say the opportunistic people in the family were always the others, not Heinrich. The opportunistic ones were the parents and the brothers who were very much more adapting to the current situation. Heinrich was an ideologist. He was convinced of this Nazi ideology in very early years, and he was constantly following this ideology, never doubting again. Over many years, there were no doubts. He was absolutely convinced that he wanted to do it. I think it's important to know that Heinrich Himmler was not only responsible for the Holocaust in a very prominent way responsible, but he also had another completely different function, the Reichskommissar für die Festigung des deutschen Volkstums, which means that he was responsible for all the settlers in the Eastern European countries. On the one hand, it meant to expel millions of people who lived there and just send them away, no matter what happened to them, if they died or not. It didn't really matter for him. And on the other hand, make the room free or the landscape free for German settlers who should come there and settle in all Eastern Europe. And this was really his heart project. This what he was really interested in and what he wanted to follow for the rest of his life. He was thinking in dimensions of centuries, of the next 200 years, what would happen, how the East would develop, and he was really enthusiastic about this. Compared to that, the Holocaust for him was just a chapter on the way to get there. This sounds really very, very cynical, but this is how he was thinking, how Heinrich Himmler was thinking.
It's a nice addition. Excuse me, I'd like to add, because Katrien just said something about becoming a farmer. In your book you wrote about Heinrich and his wife Marga. Sie interessierte sich beide für Heilkräuter und Homöopathie und träumte gemeinsam von einem eigenen Stück Land, von einer Hühnerzucht, von Gemüse und Kräuteranbau. That was one of the few times, I think the only time I had to laugh about Heinrich. They were both interested in medical herbs and homeopathy and dreamed together of their own piece of land, of raising chickens, of growing vegetables and herbs. So, he could have become a farmer if. He was for several years a farmer, and of course, I mean, the same, if Hitler would have been accepted in Vienna at Okay.
Aaron, dit wordt de laatste vraag.
The last question. So who has really an urgent question? There's now competition.
Give it to a woman.
A woman. Give it to a woman.
Stakes are high.
Only men. The woman. Katrien said the woman.
Misschien kan ik het doen zonder microfoon. Maybe it's better if I do it without microphone.
No, not. And it's also it will be taped too. So.
Good evening. My name is Annegien Laudon-Koudijs, and I have a question. Did you find an answer for yourself how it's possible to be a mass murderer and at the same time a loving father and a loving husband?
Yeah, this is a very difficult question, and I didn't really find a satisfying. I think we can only try to understand how this is possible if we are not making the mistake to see them as monsters or as Jekyll and Hyde persons who are completely divided, split into two personalities. No, it was one personality. It was one person who was able to integrate these both sides. And I think this was only possible because of their strong ideology, because they really believed in what they were doing. And what they were doing and what they were trying to execute was always this double bind, this black and white, the good side and the bad side. We are the good guys, they're the bad guys. We are the master race, all the others are subhumans, as they call them, not really human beings. So once you declare humans to being subhumans or non-humans, you can do whatever you want with them. you give them free for everything. I think that's the basis of this ideology. We have to try to understand, if we want to understand how they can be both, how they can, the men who worked in the extermination camps, how they could go every day after breakfast to the camp, kill people, come back to the family, eat with their children together, play with their children. It sounds completely absurd, and we can't get it together. But I think it's only a problem to bring it together if we try to push them away as far as possible from us, to keep them in distance by declaring them to monsters, the Nazis. They were no monsters. They were human beings doing absolutely monstrous things. And that is something that we always have to be aware about again and again, make it conscious to ourselves that human beings, all human beings, under certain circumstances are able to do horrible things to other humans.
Most, I would say. We are not sure about all. But of course, there's this separation of work. They went to the concentration camps as we are. No, most. It's not, yeah, I think it's also, there's this irony also maybe that I'd like to add, that many of them, because Catherine mentioned the word ideology, that many after the end of the war said we have been seduced and misled by the Führer. So suddenly the ideology was just like bad love, and yeah, of course to whitewash what happened. I think time has come. We could go on for many more hours, but I think time has come for a glass of wine or what else you need after this conversation. Maybe a cup of coffee or something more stiffer, a cognac. It's up to you. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to urge you at least to read this book, Die Brüder Himmler. It's also available in Dutch. It's published by Meulenhof. I think you can still buy it somewhere. Secondhand. You can still buy it secondhand, so that's a bit unfair to Catherine, but still it's important, more important that the book will be read than that you get your fees. Thank you, Catherine. I think it was a very, very pleasant conversation, if that's the word. Pleasant. I think it was an important conversation, and I hope we'll meet again. Thank you.
Mevrouw Katrien Himmler en Arnold Grunberg. Dank voor jullie komst. De beantwoording van de laatste vraag waarvoor dank maakte de cirkel rond. Ik doe het even in het Nederlands, dus net iets makkelijker voor mij. Dankjewel Katrien dat je gekomen bent. Dankjewel Arnold dat je gekomen bent. En wens je nog een fijne avond en graag tot een volgende keer.